Hi there. Welcome to my interview with Arthur Tisseront. You'll see in this interview that Arthur refers a lot to a particular demo, and that is the demo of Michael Malconian, another moderator like Arthur on the Voice Acting Club Discord. So that you know what Arthur's talking about, let's have a listen to it together for reference. Volume warning.
Careful. You are still adjusting. Many have tried and failed to endure the trial, but you are an extraordinary specimen.
Charlie 37, this is Private Takes. We've got 3 of those things stalking the perimeter. Oh God, they're multiplying.
Captain, you will need to disembark and scale the barrier. As I do not have opposable thumbs, or any limbs at all, you are on your own for this one. Do try not to evaporate. It wasn't hard. A well-timed compliment, a few long looks. You'd be surprised what someone so lonely is willing to do for a scrap of attention.
A ferret-faced little soldier boy with a teeny tiny toothpick knife and a single pathetic gun. Ooh, and a rocket launcher and... oh no.
We could turn her in, eh? Collect the bounty, hang up the guns, retire in blissful subservience to the man. Or we show the Overseer we don't bleed out our own. Being a hero seemed a lot cooler when it didn't mean losing my dad. But if he were here, he'd be leading this fight. So I've got to win this for him.
And now let's start with the interview. So, Arthur, let me start off with a fairly simple question, which is, when someone gets in touch with you wanting a demo done, what are your first steps?
So I always try to incorporate some kind of filtration process, which sounds very clinical, but I always want to make sure that the people coming to me for a demo are ready for a demo, because it doesn't always make sense to spend the money it costs to get a demo done for everybody at every stage of their career. So I usually want to make sure that they are in a place where paying for a demo makes financial sense and would actually benefit them and move them forward in what they're trying to do for VO. This applies to people who come to the the production group I have with an excellent writer and director, or just people who come to me with recorded lines who they want mixed and mastered. And what that usually looks like is just a simple 15-minute call where we can just talk, and I'll ask them very much like you're asking me questions now, where they are in their career, what exactly they want out of the demo. And usually just them having answers to those questions is enough of an indication that, okay, they're probably in a place where they need one, because generally you are getting a demo for a specific purpose, to pitch yourself to agents or studio talent pools or advertise yourself in a specific way. If they can't answer that, or the answer is generally just, I want to be a voice actor, then usually what I will do is spend a bit more time and kind of sit down and talk with them about smarter ways to spend their money. Because in general, I think it is best if people are early in their career that they do not spend the money on a demo that it takes to make a professionally produced demo, because professionally produced demos are not cheap. They take a lot of time, they take a lot of effort, but it's because we want to present you as best you can as an actor. And if you're just starting, the presentation just isn't going to come together. So I usually tell them to spend some more time auditioning, practicing, getting feedback from either coaches if they can afford them, or colleagues and friends if they have them, or just getting experience in any way they can, to the point where they kind of actively know they're being held back in their career by not having a demo. Like if you are at a point where you really are very sure you could be booking studio work, you have an excellent home studio, you have a proven project history, you know you are a good actor, but you aren't in studio talent pools, so you don't have access to those auditions, or you don't have an agent, you don't know how to present yourself, that's around when I would say, okay, it's time for a demo.
And as you've quite rightly pointed out, you know, some people might need a commercial demo, some might need a game demo, animation demo, narrative demo, audiobook demo, although, that's a little bit easier to self-produce. Is there a particular branch or type of demos that you find yourself working in the most, or at least prefer to work in?
Well, I've always been very much focused on character demos of all kinds. Fairly recently, in the past few years, I would say my specialty is very much video game demos, because I work as a dialogue designer for a game studio full time. So that is very much the thing that I do best. But I'm also very comfortable, and actually, in terms of numbers of demo produced, thinking back, I probably have made more animation demos than I have video game demos. And I'm still quite comfortable making animation demos, but the style of the video game demo is a bit more married to what I do for my day job. So it's easier for me to just go, all right, let's make this mix like a video game.
But still a lot more similar in those two than a commercial demo, which is
admittedly. And while I have done a few commercial demos that I'm quite proud of, my output is much lower volume for those. I'll always do them happily given the opportunity, but it's just different work.
So, given my audience tends to be more interested in the technical side of things, given that they're like me and therefore more interested in the technical side of things, I would love to hear more about what happens once you've received the files, assuming they're not being recorded by yourself, or once you've recorded them, if you're recording them yourself. What are the steps you go through in order to turn that from a batch of raw files into something mixed and mastered?
I am glad you asked in that specific way, because there is a thing that I do when I'm working with Amanda Hufford, the director I usually work with, that I think is really important, that kind of doesn't get mentioned a lot. And it's not a technical thing, forgive me, audience, but it is a very important production step that happens before any technical stuff happens. And that is, when Amanda directs somebody, that means that Amanda and I can sit down after the session and we can kind of talk about how the session went, the things that we noticed during the session, and exactly what takes, not only what takes they thought were best and what takes, I think, work, but what takes fit together the best. Because often the thing that we discuss the most is, okay, these are all great. What order do we put them in? And that is a bit of a bigger question than you might think, because there are a lot of considerations to weigh, and there is no objectively correct answer. I've heard some casting directors say that, like, you should always have your natural voice. The most natural voice is the first voice of your demo. And I used to say that as a mantra all the time, but I've kind of shifted fairly recently in that I think especially because attention spans are kind of just lowering on average, it's better to have the absolute best thing you can put forward, the most ear-grabbing, the most interesting performance, not necessarily the most high energy. And generally, you don't want to start with like a crying spot, because that kind of sets a weird tone. But something that goes, okay, yeah, this person's great, I want to listen more. And then based on that, there needs to be an ebb and flow. And there always is a different one based on what the actor we recorded is specialized in, what they do best, and what they asked us to show them doing, because every actor wants to showcase a different thing, even if there is a general structure that we follow. Like, for example, if we start with a spot that is loud and full of action, we don't want to go into another action spot, and then another action spot, and then an everyman spot, and then a sad spot, because then the demo energy curve is a weird line that goes down, and that just kind of mentally does not work for people. There needs to be kind of a play-by-play, and it always helps to talk that over with Amanda before we start. And that talk between us also generally helps me get aligned on what they talked about during the session as to what the intent of the spot was, because sometimes the spot is written in one way, the actor interprets it in another way, and we go, oh, that's actually way more interesting, let's do that. Because ultimately we want to showcase the decisions that they make naturally. That's what the demo is for. But once that is done, the actual technical bits I try to keep them as simple as possible. Demos are more processed than most other audio you would usually hear in a production for character stuff, but I've found that the more things that I try to do to enhance a voice, the less clear it actually gets. Excuse me, I have the hiccups. So I've kind of tried to take a minimalist approach to this. There are a couple of little tricks that I like to do, and I can so I can kind of show you the first few steps I take. This is my demo template. My God, the Brits at work are affecting me. I just said template instead of template. Oh no.
I have no problem with that.
Yes, but I as with everything here, I try to keep it as simple as possible. So I have four
clearly,
folders.
Very simple. Yeah.
Yeah, VO, music, ambience, sound effects. Each of these has their own bus, and they are to the right here. Obviously this is VO focused, so I will start with that. But you will notice one of the things that I've done here is actually done some light volume automation to some of these spots. And that is because there is not always a level of dynamics that can be solved with just a compressor. It is often cleaner to ride the gain a little bit before the compressor, especially in a spot like this last one, for example, where this was super quiet and this is super loud.
Yeah.
So I've manually adjusted it, and then all of that is running into this chain that I have here. The cleanup I do is also very simple. I run a noise reduction plugin for Michael. This is a demo from Michael Malconian, who is a fellow VAC mod and fantastic actor. Michael's setup was so good that I didn't need to use noise reduction at all. This plugin is here. I should have bypassed it because it's not doing anything except taking up processing power. But I have this chain set up the way it is so that I can bypass or put things on as is appropriate, because every voice is different. Every voice needs different treatment. When it comes to Michael's whole deal, really, his setup and presentation and technique and all that was so good that I did not need noise reduction at all. I did a little bit of mouth declicking. I usually just have this running because it never hurts if it's not on higher settings. And because mouth declick is optimized, it doesn't absolutely nuke my real-time performance, and I prefer not to render it out because I can adjust it on the fly if I need to.
Yep.
You will also see some strange splits between stereo and mono here. This is a quirk of Studio One and the way I have it set up. But effectively, you're seeing rendered light plosives that I decided to remove. They weren't egregious, but I didn't want them there because when you start to process more, it can kind of emphasize, even if they're like barely noticeable plosives, it starts to become a thing. So there were a couple here, but that's just me rendering destructively because RxD plosive is ridiculously heavy on the CPU, and it would be a nightmare to run it in real time. So yeah, first steps: cleanup, noise, clicks, technical problems, and basic volume leveling. If I'm noticing things are way quieter, like this line trailed off a lot, so I bumped it up a lot to make sure this word was clear in comparison to the rest of the line. Yeah. You will also notice I have a reverb plugin on my master VO bus. This probably reads to many people who are familiar with mixing as very strange. The intent of this, and this is fully a stylistic choice. I make no claim that this is a better or worse way to mix, but I like the way it makes things sound. You may have noticed between productions that are recorded in home studios and productions that are recorded in big studios, even for excellent home studios, there is often a bit of a difference in the sound because home studios tend to be quite small.
Yep.
And they tend to be very, very heavily dampened, which is ideal for a small space because you need to make sure all the horrible little reflections that are happening don't hit the mic, really. Yeah. But what that also means is you lose the sense of a nicely tuned space for the character to be in. And the way I choose to immerse listeners in demos is creating a space for the character to occupy. And I'll wiggle my mouse around here so it's clear, but the mix knob on Stratus is at 4%. This is barely audible.
Yeah.
And the reverb time is at 0. All this is doing is imparting a little tiny bit of early reflections to kind of emulate what a larger studio's more lively sound would sound like. And I put this before any other plugins because I want this to be, well, except noise reduction, because I don't want to put reverb on noise. But this is like as if you had recorded it in a studio. That reverb would be in the recording. And it would just be a tiny bit, but it would be enough to make it sound a little livelier, a little nicer.
And it's worth mentioning for the watchers of this, it's something I now do on my own demos. Very much imitated from you, except I have to run de-reverb as well to get rid of the nastiness in the first place.
Yeah, I think this is the only thing that I do that I could verifiably call a trick.
Yep.
Because this is really not obvious, and I guess the way I spatialize things too.
Preset called Room Trick in my setup.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh! I thought you meant it came with it by default.
No. I've saved it as Room Trick. The preset. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I found that Stratus has a very natural sounding early reflection algorithm, so cool.
And also worth mentioning for any watchers, Stratus is now replaced. It is a bit of a stretch, but Equinox is kind of the current iteration of that family. I won't get Arthur started on whether Equinox is
They killed Exponential Audio, my beloved. No, it's the same algorithm in Equinox, so it'll sound just as good.
It is also mind-numbingly more complicated.
Yeah, for all the incredible functionality their plugins have, Isotope's UI choices have been interesting as of late, we'll say. But yes, still, other than that, basic cleanup, noise reduction, click reduction. If there have been other technical issues, occasionally we'll get clipping. I'll declip, but that also doesn't run live because that's too heavy. Then we get into our most basic forms of processing, an EQ.
Yeah.
This, I do not have any standard presets. This is not something you should also do to your audio. I always start with a 0 curve and make it bespoke per actor because every voice and every setup is different and requires different treatment. These are dynamic bands, which I find often work very well in the low end because when we are working with a variety of voices like this, or a variety of performances, when people are imparting different inflections and tones to their voice, I don't always need to reduce this by this much. So the dynamic bands help make it so I'm only reducing as much as I need. And then for Michael in particular, I found that his setup was just a tad dark, so I added some high end.
Yeah.
That's it. As with everything with EQ, I also try to keep things simple. I usually limit myself to a high pass filter and like 3 or 4 bands at most. I also either use the natural or linear phase setting in ProQ because I find that if I don't use that, the phase rotation imparted by a low pass filter, my ears find it very unpleasant. Again, stylistic choice. I just don't like it, so I do this. Next thing. A compressor. It's a compressor. It doesn't do anything any non-fab filter compressor can't do. Relatively quick attack, medium release, 4:1 ratio, threshold appropriate to the volume the actor was delivering at, makeup gain also appropriate to the volume the actor was delivering at. It's almost the default setting. Pro C is really good. I like its default setting a lot. And also, I'm going to repeat this a lot in this conversation, but simpler is better. You'll notice I have an EQ and a compressor, and it's not doing anything fancy. I have the knee in the middle because I do like a little bit of softness when it's a VO thing. I have oversampling on to prevent any aliasing, but nothing else really is going on.
You also have a second instance of a compressor that's currently disabled.
I do. And the reason for that is, remember when I said I have this chain here that I enable and disable as needed?
Yeah.
For some actors, I find it helps to add a second one at a very low ratio because ratios are multiplicative. So that this doesn't work quite as hard and it smooths things out a little bit. And it basically, the more you compress something, the closer an actor feels to you. Yeah. And I don't always want them to feel super close, but some actors, by virtue of their setup or their tone of voice, feel a little bit far away. So I add this compressor and then I tune it based on how much closer I want them to feel. But you do need to be really careful with stacking compressors, because if you do, like I said, ratios are multiplicative. So if you start with 4:1 and then you add another 4:1 ratio compressor, you are now compressing at 16:1. So that can get out of hand very quickly.
Serial compressors, but I use them at a 1.3:1 ratio. And I use a minimum of 4, but that still only adds up to, I think, a 2.5:1 ratio once you're multiplying them all.
Yeah. So and again, this is a choice I make. I could very well do the classic thing where you do one fast and one slow compressor to eat peaks and stuff, but yeah. I prefer to eat, well, metaphorically, because I didn't actually do it here, but eat peaks. And, if I find that this is hitting the compressor a little too hard, I'll just do this.
Yeah.
And that works in a way that to my ear sounds a bit more natural. This mirrors how I work on things for games. The games I work on are generally meant to be very realistic, like third-person AAA action games. So when we process recordings for those, we want them to sound as natural and unaffected as possible. And while this is more processing than I do for those, because this is a demo, it still needs to grab the listener. I try to keep things in a nice middle ground between natural and exciting.
Yeah.
And natural can be exciting in its own way. This is a plugin I quite like. It is called Oxford Inflator. It's just a wave shaper and a clipper. It's, again, quite simple. Effect and curve basically just change how much wave shaping it's doing. It's subtle distortion, and curve changes the tone of the wave shaping. The higher the curve, the more harmonics it imparts. And this is basically a tone shaper. It adds weight to either the low end or the high end based on what I want from their voice. I found that Michael had a very nice low end, and I was cutting out a little bit of it here. And I didn't want as much of it overtly, but I wanted a little more of that. So I put a little bit back in here. This is one of those things that I will always tune per actor and sometimes just bypass entirely. It depends totally on how they sound.
And it's just been on sale. Unfortunately, the sale ended a couple of days ago. But
unfortunate timing, yeah.
A lot of people will have just got their hands on it, including me. I haven't used it yet, but I have just bought it.
If you are a Reaper user, somebody has made a JSFX Reaper plugin for free that is a 1-to-1 clone of this.
Wow, I'd like to have known that before I bought it.
It doesn't have the UI, so it is a bit harder to use, but it is null tested, so it is exactly the same in terms of sound. Nice. So if you don't want to spend the full price on the plugin, the JSFX Reaper, I forget the name honestly. I wish I had it off the top of my head.
It's all right. I'll hunt it down. I'll put it in the description of the video.
There is an alternative available, basically. Only works in Reaper, but a lot of people use Reaper.
Yeah.
Right. Also, I should have started with this. I'm using an uncommon DAW. I'm using Studio 1.7. I like the workflow of Studio 1. I find its spatialization workflow very good. I'll get to that in a bit.
Fair enough.
But yeah, Oxford Inflator. And then this is, again, one of my optional plugins. Mag has a sub and air band that can impart low and high harmonics that aren't audible as EQ, but are audible as excitement. And this, again, is a way that if somebody is lacking, I'm sure you might have heard audio described as like sparkling highs.
Yeah.
If somebody's lacking that, sometimes they're there, but just need to be enhanced a little bit, like as with this recording. But sometimes they're not there at all. And the Mag Air band, that's 40 kilohertz. That's above the range of human hearing. So what that does is it basically just adds harmonics to the high end that you can perceive but barely hear. And this is, if I feel that is needed, I will put that on to make things pop a little bit out of the mix. Not everybody needs this, especially because sometimes this can emphasize sibilance quite badly. Or if it's the sub band, it can seriously harm the low end, because especially if somebody's voice is deeper, I never use this. But sometimes for people with voices on the higher pitch, cranking this a little bit can add some richness to the lows that wasn't there before. But yeah, case by case. And I use the 2-band version because if I used the full band, like 5-band version, I'd be tempted to use the other bands, and I don't want to be.
Okay. Yeah. I'm just going to jump a few plugins ahead, but Aren't you somewhat undoing that with Soothe too?
So I will explain why that's there. So first I'll get to Pro DS because this is simple to explain. It's a de-esser. I tune it per person. The range and threshold and this depends on what their S frequency is. I don't really know what else to say. It's a de-esser. Any de-esser will work.
Right.
I just like FabFilter plugins.
A note for my viewers who will know I've got a thing for Sonables plugins rather than Fab filters. This will all bear a lot of resemblance to anyone who's seen me set up Smart EQ, Smart Comp, and Pure DS, because I actually prefer the cheap one to the expensive one. But it should all look largely familiar in terms of settings.
Yeah. And de-essing is one of those things that you're going to need to tune per actor because everybody's S range is different. There's general rules, but you never know. Occasionally, I'll have to de-ess using EQ if people have whistly S's or using Soothe. But yes, let's talk about Soothe. This plugin is a lot of things. It can enhance and harm and do more harm than good and do more good than harm. The way I use it, and this is because my ears are very, very sensitive to this kind of thing. I use it, to control the low end, because in addition to this dynamic EQ, I find that Soothe is actually better at following low harmonics. And also, I find that the frequencies from around 2.4 to 4K here can be very, very unpleasant when they are run through any kind of distortion. So while distortion is good, to some degree, and this is not distortion. It is this is technically distortion, but calling it distortion calls to mind like guitar amps and stuff. This is saturation, very subtle distortion. However, it is adding harmonics, and very often what I'm doing here is reducing harmonics. So, because a lot of the time people's small booths have issues taming the bass frequencies from this area in general up to 300 hertz, I tame it here. I might add it back here. I might add it back here. And often I find that I have a really tough time striking a balance between enhanced enough to sound good to me and exciting to listen to without any semblance of piercingness that I find can be imparted by this kind of processing. So this is basically a final smoothing out of these two areas if they are built up. And again, I don't work this very hard. It's usually like down here, only working like -3 at most.
Yeah.
But I find it's a good last step, basically. I'm using it for the final general tone shape if there is anything problematic. Ozone 9, I don't really use this anymore. Honestly, I should remove this because heavily limiting vocals kills the dynamics. I barely use this. It's kind of a holdover from this being a not old template, but I haven't fully cleaned it up. It's a little messy.
Fair enough.
Yeah, does that answer your Soothe question?
It does indeed answer my Soothe question, exactly.
All righty.
And I can't even read what's at the bottom. What's it say?
Oh, that's relay. I was doing some testing with Isotope Relay because it can do some things where it like measures a bunch of buses and does stuff based off that. Mostly unsuccessful. I don't trust plugins that try to do their own thing. I prefer very controllable and specific settings. Yeah. If you could tell from the things that I use.
It's definitely a thing that you prefer the control rather than the kind of algorithmic or AI driven stuff, which I admittedly am fond of with EQ, but kind of only use with EQ.
And like there's nothing inherently wrong with those tools. If they work for you, feel free to use them. I get a lot of joy out of finding my own optimizations to make people sound as good as possible. And I often find like I surprise myself with the way I do things when I do things manually. So it takes a little more time, but I like to think it's worth the effort.
So I think there's a fairly predictable question, which I'm going to ask you next, which is, where do you sit on the loudness wars?
Ah, yes. I sit on the side of the loudness wars are over and loudness won.
Yep.
Because as much as I hate my incredibly compressed, like ridiculously loud, fuck me, I once heard a demo at, I don't know if your audience is okay with swearing, but I should have asked. Whatever.
I hope they
The
fucking are.
I heard a demo. I heard a demo come in at -2 lufs once, and I think that's a little bit excessive. Uh, so I usually bring mine up to around -14, between -14 and -12.
Okay.
I used to bring them up to -8, and that is really loud. But I found that doing that was pushing me to just heavily limit things in the name of volume, and it just never came out well, no matter how much I tuned it. And like, it was loud. That's kind of all it was.
Yeah.
I look back on some of my old demos and I'm like, oh God, what was I doing? Because effectively, what I find more important than volume is making sure it is loud enough, and also making sure the vocal is prominent. Because a lot of the time, people are listening to demos on a really, really shitty speaker. They're listening on a phone, a laptop speaker, just wherever they happen to be at the time. Their ear pods, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time producers need to listen to a lot of things very quickly. They don't go into like a big mix studio, because ultimately, as much set dressing as I can put on a demo, the sound design only matters to the point where it enhances the feeling of the VO.
Yeah.
Anybody listening to a demo wants to hear the actor. So as long as the demo is loud enough and the voice is clear and natural, that is what I think works best. So my philosophy is kind of in the middle ground. I do think demos need to be loud, mainly because demos are loud, and that's kind of the expectation. But also I find that sometimes we go too far. So I think a nice, 14 to 12 is like a little bit above podcast standard, I think.
Yeah.
So that kind of guarantees that anybody listening to on a phone they probably have their phone loud enough, because most people are listening to either audiobooks, podcasts, or music on their phone. So they will have that volume in that range.
That makes a lot of sense. So I think we've covered dialogue quite comprehensively.
Sure.
What about...
Actually, we haven't. There's one last thing. Sorry. I said I would mention this, but the reason I use Studio One, you notice all of my buses are at 714, but I'm on headphones. I do not have an Atmos set up in this room, but I mix in Atmos in Studio One. Why do I do that? Because I can do stuff like this. And this is how we mix things in games, because games are inherently spatial media.
Yeah.
If you think about a third-person character action game, the character is in front of the camera, which is listening. If somebody is speaking to you, they are in front of you. So what I use is the 714 surround panner in Studio One to bump things forward a little bit, and that. It's an HRTF algorithm. It's basically a very subtle EQ, but it makes it feel like things are in front of you instead of in your head. And again, in the name of immersion, I find it feels more natural, and it also makes things cut through the mix a little bit better. Okay, now we've covered dialogue.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I mix in... I'm not entirely sure what I mix in. I certainly mix in more than stereo, because some of the plugins I have work much, much better if I can break it down into further channels.
Yeah, that too. We can see it in Stratus here with all the stuff going on.
Primarily, if I use side-chained compression, Smart Comp 2 works differently based on if you crank it up to at least 4 or 5 channels, and it makes a much more pleasant side-chained compression, much less obvious as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure why. I don't have the technical knowledge to actually work out why, but it does make quite a difference. So this time we've covered dialogue. So what about the other side of the demos, which is of course all your sound effects, your music, your incidentals, your Foley, your...
Yes. So you will notice that my other buses are incredibly simple. That is because I am a bit of a minimalist in some ways when it comes to placing stuff. I'm not a minimalist when it comes to the actual presence of sound effects. I quite like having a dense, immersive mix, because that's how I mix games. And that's how I like games to be. But in terms of the way things are processed, I much prefer... I mean, we always talk about getting it right at the source in VO. If your recording sounds good going in, it's going to be much easier to just to kind of drop it into a mix and have it sound good without any further processing. The same thing holds true to Foley and effects. I have put quite a bit of time into trying to source the best quality Foley I can, whether that's recording it myself or just buying libraries, and making sure that it's Foley that I effectively do not need to process at all, and it will just sit in a mix just fine. I could compress it. The reason I don't is because, like I said before, compression brings things closer, and Foley is not the focus of a demo. I compress music a little bit with an SSLG bus, specifically because it removes some of the mids, and mids are where the vocals lie. And it also adds weight to the low end, and most of the low end in a demo is vocals and explosions.
Yeah.
Sorry, not vocals and explosions, music and explosions. So I like this specific compressor for music. It doesn't compress much, like 4 at most. Now, what's more important for the music, sound effects, and ambience buses are my EQ. So this EQ is a bit more aggressive than what you saw on the VO stuff, and that is because all of the EQ on these 3 buses is in service of making the VO make sense in the mix and pop out without me having to use full-on, full-volume side chaining, because that immediately sounds unnatural. That's also the reason I don't really heavily limit anything. So what I do here is I take the side to the left and right stereo information out of the music from 100 hertz down, because that just doesn't play well with mono devices. And like I said, we're often listening on laptop or phone speakers, which are mono. Mm-hmm. Even if they want you to believe they're stereo, they're mono. Technically stereo, but it presents as mono. It doesn't matter all that much. But these bands, I've selected them because I think they work for most people, but this is around where vocal intelligibility lies to my ear. So whenever somebody speaks in the demo, these bands get reduced by a little bit. Reducing the mids too much makes the mix unreadable on devices like phones that are all mids, because suddenly your music just kind of isn't there, which doesn't work, because you do kind of need music as an emotional driver just a little bit. I do very similar things for the ambience and sound effects. The music, I also dip the very, very highs a little bit because I prefer that to be occupied entirely by vocal air for mix purposes again. And if I look at the ambience bus, you'll see largely the same thing. Ambience, I actually just cut out mids always, and lows too, because it's ambience. While it helps set a scene, it's really only audible if someone's listening on headphones or studio speakers, so it's not the focus of the mix, unless the spot calls for it, which it sometimes does. If I need ambience with bass, I'll put it in the sound effects section, because it's more of a sound effect at that point. And sound effects...
Interestingly, you do something very different to me there, which is you've sidechained EQ, and I always sidechain compression to cut the sound down. So what is the rationale for sidechaining EQ rather than compression? Obviously, you've said why you don't sidechain volume outright, and, you know, nobody wants just duct audio. It just sounds like you're on radio, but...
Yeah. When you say sidechain compression, do you mean a multiband compressor or a regular compressor?
It's actually a very, very multi-band spectral 2000 band compressor. But
okay, yeah. So the reason I do that, honestly, so functionally, besides the spectral part, where that one's doing, you know, more stuff specific to certain bands, a dynamic EQ is a multiband compressor. It's almost the same thing. The only difference is that a dynamic EQ is only downwards compression, whereas a multiband compressor is also upwards compression. If it's a traditional multiband compressor, I'm not sure how that one works. And in this case, I don't want the quiet stuff to be any louder. I just want the quiet stuff to be, or loud stuff to be quieter. So all I want is a simple flat reduction when someone is talking, and that's what this gets me.
Okay, it does sound
would
like
probably
we're
work,
getting exactly the same thing from the way ours is set up. Then.
Yeah, it's basically, it's different methods to do the same thing. Yeah. Either one works.
Fair enough.
But yeah, that's basically it for my bus processing. And then I also have, for character stuff, every spot gets reverb. Even if it's just a little bit. It's really, to the ear, it's unnatural to not have reverb in a space. I don't have reverb on FX3 here, but I know I had a reason for that. I just need to listen to the demo again to remember why. But basically, yeah, these these SFX buses are what imparts reverb to the sound effects. And the reverb is also applied to the vocal, and only the vocal and the sound effects. Ambience doesn't get reverb unless it's a sound effect, because ambience is the space itself. It doesn't reverberate in a space. And this is, everything is bused to the same sound effects buses for per spot. You can see here I kind of have like cascading automation to make sure each spot has the correct reverb send. And that is done to make sure that everything is happening in the same audible space. So that, you know, if a voice happens and an explosion happens in the same area, it sounds like they're in the same spot. And this is not always extreme. You can see here, I have some echo plugins, some delay plugins. I usually do this for outdoors because outdoors doesn't really have reverb a lot of the time. It just has some reflections. You can hear late reflections. And this gets me there just fine. And for other stuff, I will use usually Stratus, appropriate to the spot at hand. Sometimes I'll do some wonky stuff, like you can see. Actually, you can't see, but you can now. The first spot of Michael's demo presents the listener inside a vat of liquid. That was a fun thing to figure out how to do while still keeping his voice clear. But that's why there's so much shit going on here and some shit going on here. But the vast majority of stuff is just, here's some reverb to place it spatially. I am not doing much to each individual sound effect. I try my best, like I said, to make sure my sounds are sourced in a way where they work in the mix. And also this also just saves time, because after a certain point, I cannot just bespoke sound design every beat. It would make the cost of demos unreasonable for the amount of hours it would take me to do.
Yeah.
And I also, while the demos that I make are not cheap by any means, I try to keep the cost down as much as I can, because I think it's important to be accessible, even if it's technically a expensive thing. But you'll also see that for some of the sound effects, I do have one-off effects. Like this, I just wanted less mids because it was interrupting the vocal.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I did the same thing here. Now this was for lows, and sometimes I'll also, just like light cleanup and stuff like that is very common for things that have too much bass or too many mids. I'll occasionally use a distortion plugin like Devil Lock to make sure that like something like this, to kind of make something pop. Like this is just a wall switch, but I wanted it to sound huge. So I put a ton of distortion and compression and then mix that in parallel. And that makes it sound bigger than it is. Push that into the reverb and it sounds spatialized. Layer that with two different hydraulic sounds and a hatch opening, and you sound like you have pressed a switch to open a spaceship hatch. The goal is always to make sure the actions of the actor's character are clear and any information that is important to convey happening around them. For example, this spot is just the actor speaking as if they were like an AI assistant in a game telling you what to do, basically, as the hero prepares to do something. So this spot is mixed from the perspective of you are the player, the actor is your companion, your snarky computer talking to you. As a player, what would I hear while this is happening? This is a mission briefing. So I hear a spacecraft landing. We hear some general Foley to indicate something is like pushing down on a surface. These are very poorly labeled, thanks me, but they are sound effects. These are footsteps and then a Foley of military gear juggling. So the character is walking. They press a switch, they walk a little bit more, they open the door to the outside, and when they open the door to the outside, the ambience of an otherworldly planet fades in and leads to the next spot. I always want to make sure that I'm keeping things moving and that we are focusing on enhancing the action. So this ship AI is briefing for a mission. What kind of game are we in? This is sci-fi. Military sci-fi is a very commonly cast for genre. And I loved Doom Eternal and 2016 and The Dark Ages. So I basically just went, what if Vega?
Nice.
And that's the philosophy that I take for all mixing, even in these really busy spots. Oops, I don't know. Even in these really busy spots, like this is the character is panicking and surrounded by monsters stalking them. That's why there's so much going on here.
Yeah.
But all that serves is to sell the panic. And then when he gets eaten and screams, there's some crunching and footsteps raising to indicate it's approaching. So yes, there's a lot going on in sound sometimes in these spots, but it is entirely to sell the experience. And like I said, the first spot here we have the character, the listener, is inside a tank, and I've put appropriate resonance on his voice to make it sound like you're underwater, but it's still clear. This is all the flailing movements and hitting of the glass that your character in a first-person perspective would do were this a scene playing out in front of you. So I'm always visualizing what's happening and trying to figure out how to best serve that. Without visuals, I kind of have to get a little bit more complicated with the mix because there is no visual aid, and I want people to immediately understand what's happening in the spot by listening to it. I think the best kind of mixes are the ones where even if there was a visual component, you close your eyes and you're there anyway. The visuals don't matter. The mix works. So I take that philosophy as far as I can without eating into the voice too much, because these kinds of spots are very tricky because it is a busy situation, panicking soldiers, screaming, monsters, big footsteps, death, crunching, all that. But the voice still needs to be audible.
Yeah.
And you can see here on the Vox 2, I actually added a compressor just to this channel to make sure the voice was popping the whole time to make it a little closer. So I will do things case by case. This has affecting on it because it's an AI that needs to sound a little computery. And then some spots get some helpings of soothe if there's a harsh point that I really don't like.
Yeah.
But the case by case stuff, this just kind of comes up as I mix it. I never do this first. This always happens after the mix is kind of established. And I think, okay, are there problem spots where I'm hearing things I don't want to hear or where the VO is clashing with the mix? Then I reduce what I need to reduce to make that work. Or just delete the sound effect entirely if it's too much. I often find that my first pass is way too heavy on the sound effects because I'm just like, yeah, everything's making sound. This is so cool. And then I sleep on it and I listen to the next day and I go, what the fuck was I doing? I need to remove half of this. And then I do. And then that's the finished demo.
Nice. So I've got two last questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
I think. First is, how long would this have taken you?
So it kind of depends. My schedule as a creative person is unfortunately a little bit volatile. And it also depends on just how well the actor nailed it. Michael's demo took me a day because his performances were excellent. And to the point where I listened to them once and I went, I know exactly what I want to do with this spot. Boom, 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 boom. Have a little bit of fun with this spot to tune it because I've never done a spot like this. And you'll notice that I'm stacking 3 convolution reverbs and trash and soothe. This was a wild spot. I'm so proud of it. So I like to have a little fun when I can, as long as it's not to the detriment of the voice, because this is the enjoyable bit to me. But basically, the better the performance, the quicker the demo goes. Or sometimes if I'm having an off day or I just cannot figure out a spot, I will take minimum usually a week. And I just said I could finish a demo in a day. When I say that, I mean I could place a mix in a day. The rest of the week is fine tuning. And also because I do audio for my day job, I generally do not want to, both for mental health reasons, but also for my ears are fatigued and I'm not doing good work at this point reasons. After an 8-hour day of mixing or working on a game sound or dialogue scene or something, can I come home and give my best work to the demo that might get an actor a spot on a roster or an agent's list? No. So I simply will not do that and wait until my ears are rested. It usually takes me a couple of weeks because I want to make sure it gives it the time it needs to stand out. I can place things quickly. Tuning and mixing takes a while.
Fair enough. And that is why you charge 5 times what I do.
Yes. I don't actually know how much you charge, but the reason it's expensive is because
of what you charge. I'm a
fair enough.
beginner.
Yeah, I mean,
very early in this.
Yeah, basically, like I don't have any wish to like sit here and justify why I charge what I do, but the reasoning
I don't quite understand why you
why
don't charge 2 or 3 times more. So there we are.
Yeah, I mean the reason I do is because I'm charging with the tacit admission that this might take a little bit of time for me to turn your demo around, because I want to make sure you as an actor are being shown in the best light possible. And also, critically, I want to make sure you are not coming back to me in a year for a new demo. If I did my job right, I will either see you in 5 years or never again.
Yeah.
Because that means the demo was good, you got it at the right time, it did what it needed to do, and now you're an established actor. That is the best case scenario. One thing that also might be good to mention is I always send that first placement mix over before I do any volume tuning or any sort of leveling over to the actor, just to make sure they know what I've gone for with each spot and go, hey, does this vibe? Do you like what I've put together here? Because while I am the one making all these mix decisions, it is the actor's demo. If I took a direction in a spot they didn't like, I will change it. I want you to be showcased in the light that you want to be showcased in. That is not my decision to make.
Fair enough.
And that's
So one final question, and the answer might be no. Is there any other question I should have asked you that I haven't asked you?
Oh, that is a good question. I struggle to think of anything I haven't covered necessarily. One thing I guess I will say philosophically, these are poorly labeled because I never show anyone these sessions. This is me. I actually mentally color code these, and I don't use the text on these channels at all. But you'll notice that the first channel is all cloth. This is just cloth. Yeah. I have 4 or 5 different 10-minute long cloth recordings of various types of clothes that I use on every demo and have since I started making a demo. These are recordings I did in my dad's basement of my old ratty jeans with a 416 in an untreated room. They have made it on every demo I have ever mixed because cloth is incredibly versatile. It tells so much about a thing. If somebody is, let's say somebody punches someone, you didn't hear anything there because I'm wearing a t-shirt. That didn't make any noise. If somebody was wearing a military vest and like a Kevlar vest and like had a gun in their other hand, a bunch of grenades clanking on their belt, and they did a full body punch, that would sound like all of those things. So I have a range of cloth based on basically different kinds of clothes, casual clothes, fancy clothes. I have additional Foley for military layers, armor layers, leather, elegant clothes, because I very often find myself mixing like royalty for some reason, but that I have enough occurrences of that where I have like silken cloth sounding things. It's not silk, it's just a smooth sounding shirt I have, but cloth is versatile. I like cloth. This channel is entirely reserved for cloth specifically for that reason, because movement is not quiet as much as your brain filters it out. People make sound when they move, even just walking around in jeans. And that's what this tries to sell. I think that's the only thing I actually haven't gone over. That and actually 2 other things. There's that. There is the fact that I have somebody's demo who I like up here muted and passed through directly to the main mix, so that if I am ever unsure about the levels of like relative volume of the music, of the SFX, of the VO, I just solo this, listen to it briefly. I have my reference. I go back to mixing. This is one of Kira's.
When in doubt, go for the admin of VAC. Yep.
Yes. Kira's animation demo is really good. And then the only other thing is this plugin here on my listen bus called VSX. This is a time saver, but it is huge. Oh, I don't want to do this right now, Slate. I didn't think it would do this. Okay. You can kind of see from behind here, this is like a mixing room. These are actually a specific pair of headphones designed to use a very complicated set of impulse responses, HRTF responses, and distortion and all this stuff to emulate sitting in a mixing room. But
Is this
it not
similar
only
to
emulates
the
that.
Dear Reality plugin that I use?
No, this is called the Slate VSX.
Okay, because I use a Dear Reality plugin that has a correction in it for the Shure at 1540s.
Oh yes, it might do something similar. These are a little more specialized, but they have basically it has replaced the step where I export my mix, email it to myself on my phone, and then listen on my phone to make sure it's not terrible on mono devices. Because this has an emulated phone. So it's not necessary, but it saves a ton of time. It has an emulated phone, an emulated car, emulated mono boombox speakers, a bunch of different kinds of headphones, including the ones I'm using. Actually, it's been pretty funny to compare them one to one. So it has enough reference rooms that, like, yes, obviously these are not perfect one-to-one recreations of $150,000 mixing spaces. That's not possible for a $500 pair of headphones. But it does what it needs to do for mix referencing. I can understand, does my mix work in mono? Does my mix work on bass heavy equipment? Does my mix work on high heavy equipment? Does my mix have too much bass? Because bass is hard to hear on headphones, and this has really, really good like bass responses in its rooms. So this is a time saver final checker plugin to make sure that I've done my job correctly.
And that's a specific set of headphones. What are they called?
Slate VSX.
Slate VSX, because I will link to those in the description, as I try and link to everything that gets mentioned.
Yes, but yeah, that kind of presents like the end of it. That's the last thing I do. I check on the VSX and make sure everything's all right.
That's fantastic.
So I think we're about there.
I think we are. That was amazing. That was so in depth, and I think it was so interesting to me. So hopefully it'll be even half as interesting to anybody else who watches this. Thank you so much for joining us for this interview. It was a pleasure for both Arthur and myself to do it. We kept on chatting for a while after it was over. Join me next time for another interview. Next time I will be joined by Mike Del Gaudio, nominative determinism if ever I heard a name, otherwise known as Booth Junkie, where we'll be talking through his favourite plugins, his favourite Reaper tricks, his favourite microphones, and more. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.